A very warm welcome to everybody. This is a very special occasion. I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Ancient World Research Cluster of Wolfson and indeed Wolfson College as a whole. It's the first time we've had an event in collaboration with the CBRL, and it's wonderful to have it on this special occasion of a book launch by Kay Prag, who's done us the honour of moving down to Oxford and therefore becoming part of our cluster and part of our community. And it's exciting and wonderful to have her here and to be able to celebrate the book launch with you. That's all I have to say. Welcome, and I can hand over to the CBRL and Jane.
So I have the honour of welcoming you on behalf of CBRL, the Council for British Research in the Levant. Hopefully many of you know that we exist to support and conduct and facilitate excellent research across the humanities and social sciences, across the Levant and beyond. We've got a great programme of activities and all sorts of ways that we can support research. So I would encourage you, if you are working in the Levant or thinking about studying something on the Levant, have a look at our website, join our community, sign up to our newsletter, and we will look forward to collaborating in the future. And that's all I'm going to say, because obviously we're not the point of this evening. But what I will do is hand over to Dr. Buley, who is going to say a few words about Kay Prag and introduce her properly. So over to you. Thanks.
I wondered why I was here. That's not what I've written down, and especially as you've all got one of these, have you not? And therefore you can read all about Kay in there, because it tells you when she was born, where she lived, what she did, and how wonderful she is. So there's no point in me repeating that. But it even mentions that she is now part of the Wolfson Common Room and Ancient Worlds Research Cluster, which has to be one of the best names of any organisation ever. Clusters are always better than committees or anything else. Until this morning, I didn't really know what I was going to say, and then a friend of mine, and there's a lot of Manchester connections in what I'm going to say, sent me a Venn diagram from the New Scientist. This friend was sunning himself in Australia, but that's another story. And the Venn diagram was the commonality between a pirate, a dog, and an archaeologist. Now, it's got to be good because it was in the New Scientist. So what we share as archaeologists with the dog is that we get excited by bones. What we share on this Venn diagram with the pirate is that we're good with maps. And common to all three is we love digging things up. So, Kay, you're in that category of loving digging things up. But presumably, I'm not sure what you feel about dogs or pirates, but I'm sure you're also good with maps. Now, the other thing I wanted to say was that archaeology is all about connections. And we've heard the connections with CBRL, and it may come as a surprise to you that the name Prague has been familiar to me for, and I think it is 50 years. It might be 49, but it's a very long time ago. I started my undergraduate degree in Manchester in 1975, and if it wasn't John Prague popping in to teach us about Greek vases, sorry John, I never followed it up. It was also Kay being very enthusiastic about fieldwork and the Middle East. And that meant a lot to me because I was lucky enough, through another connection in Manchester, Charles Burney, to travel to Iran and Iraq. The Manchester connection then continued in 1998 by sheer chance with David Kennedy, who also helped with the Iktanu project and an aerial photographic thing, because Barry Jones in Manchester ran a course in aerial archaeology. And so David, through our connections, asked me to join a project in the aerial archaeology project in Jordan. And as often happens when working abroad, you never know who you're going to bump into. And from time to time, we'd be in Amman and Kay would be there. And so our paths have crossed over those 50 years, whether it's been in Amman, London, or more recently Oxford. And I think also I bumped into an exhibition in the British Museum once as well. And as you know, and as it says here, in 1990s, Kay directed a project to posthumously publish Kathleen Kenyon's excavations in the old cities of Jerusalem. And that reminded me of the fact that also a connection with Barry Jones, one wet November, Sunday it was, I remember it well, and I guess it was 1977, I volunteered to assist Barry Jones in a little bit of excavation in Whitchurch, the Roman fort, Mediolanum, which is between Chester and Roxeter. It was a Sunday, and I remember having a massive hangover. Barry drove, and there was one other volunteer. He told me there were lots, but there was only one. And this person was already knee-deep in mud, troweling away, and I joined her. Barry then, as he was wont to do, just went off. We never saw him again. Anyway, there I am, troweling away, chatting to this person, a female. We swapped names, and then I was beginning to sober up, because she was telling me about the Middle East and her experience at Jericho. And I thought, oh, Kathleen. By this time, the penny dropped. It was indeed Dame Kathleen Kenyon herself. And sadly, we never met again because she died in 1978. But I hope, Kay, you're going to say a few words about Kathleen Kenyon, because she was, I think, an inspiration to a lot of people, presumably to you as well. So what I wanted to say was, why is this publication so important? Well, first of all, publishing your excavations is the number one priority of any archaeologist. And I'm sure there are archaeologists in the audience who have a publication backlog, and they wish they didn't have. Now, I only have one unpublished excavation. It's not mine, it's one of Barry Jones's, and he handed it to me and said, Bob, you said this thing that I thought was Roman was prehistoric. It is, you publish it. And sadly, I haven't done it, but I will do it now that I'm retired. Okay, now the other reason this project's important is that isn't just its longevity, but it's also that it combined excavation and landscape survey. And it's essential for our understanding of the use of this challenging landscape, because as we'll hear from Kay, it is a challenging landscape and it has been forever. But for me, what I think is the most important thing about this publication, and it may not be relevant immediately, is that for archaeology to survive, we've got to make it relevant to today and modern society. And we've heard about in the press very, very recently about how difficult it is for universities to survive. And I worry that archaeology as a subject is under threat in universities. So it's even more important to make it relevant to modern society. And it's not just about digging things up, as the pirate and the dogs do. This research that Kay's undertaken will help in our understanding of human adaptation to changing environments. So it has a relevance because, for me, one of the most important things in the world, if not the most important thing in the world, is how we adapt to climate change as a species, but also as archaeologists. So if we don't find those strategies to survive, then it is an existential threat. Now, that may be overstating the case, but it gives a relevance to why this work is so important. So without further ado, and I hope that hasn't made it too difficult for you, Kay, over to you.
Well, good evening. What Bob has been saying, of course, has many points of contact with what I will be talking about, not just the subject, but the people concerned. Because, as the title that I made up for this lecture says, 60 years, it is actually 60 years this year since I first set foot on Iktanu. And during all of that time, it has been either actively pursued or actively ignored, but it always been in the back of my mind. I went for the first season in 1966, and then when I was able to, 20 years later, for another 3 seasons, 1987 to 1990. And it remains, even though, thank goodness, the report is done, it is still very much in my mind and thoughts. See if I get the thing isn't working. If I push that forward, it's meant to be that arrow.
Yes, it is.
And that should take it forward, and it isn't. It did before.
Misbehaving technology.
So,
Would you, let's see. Oh, the whole thing's, yeah. Sorry, everyone.
I'll just get myself a glass of water then.
Oh, I've got you on there.
Thank you very much.
So, funnily enough, the whole thing, even the keyboard is not working. So, I might need to. Ah, there we go. Let's just move this over. Right, is it working? Oh, brilliant. Just needed a jiggle.
Yes. Fine. Thank you.
Move that out the way.
So I should start by, for those of you who don't actually know the location of this mega site, by showing you where it is in the Eastern Mediterranean in Jordan. Israel, the West Bank, Palestine, Jordan, and Iktanu is located 12 kilometers approximately northeast of the Dead Sea in the Jordan Valley. And I should start by expressing my thanks to the Department of Antiquities, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, who has supported and provided permits with great efficiency over many years, not just to my thanks to the Directors General and their staff, but to their representatives in the field. I've had great support from the Council for British Research in the Levant over those years also, originally in the manifestation of the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem, which sponsored the first season in 1966, and then the British Institute at Amman, which sponsored the following 3 seasons. My thanks are also due to Manchester Museum, which has given me a home and a place to work on the post-excavation material, which has been so important to the whole project. And finally, in this sense, to thank Wolfson College for their kind welcome. There are, of course, so many others that I cannot mention by name. The teams who worked with me in the field, the people who wrote the contributions and studies that are in the published report, absolutely valuable and fascinating work, which I have tried to integrate in the report itself. And there are countless volunteers who have helped with a great deal of the work over the years as well. And I should also, at the end, say that the volume is dedicated to the late Mrs. Crystal Bennett, because she gave me huge support during the first season, which I remember with great gratitude. So what was I doing going to Iktanu? What were the aims of the project? At the time, in the first half of the 20th century, there was an image of the latter part of the 3rd millennium being something of a dark age. Following the destruction of most of the township walled towns in early Bronze III, and if not a bit earlier. And the period was mostly known from extensive cemeteries, usually of shaft graves, like this one on the Mount of Olives, a shaft cut in the stone or in the earth with an entrance block, usually blocked by a stone, to a chamber. But very little was known about the settlement sites of the period, and there was a sort of image of there being pastoralist tribes, possibly who had moved in from Syria and destroyed the townships. And so my project really was to explore the nature of settlement in the later 3rd millennium in Jordan, and in fact in Lebanon, and to some extent over the whole of the South Levant. But at the time, we knew very, very little about what was going on in Syria. As part of my doctoral work, as a student, Kathleen Kenyons, who was then principal of St Hugh's College here, I drew up a plan of the settlement distribution, largely known from the survey work of Nelson Gluck in the 1930s and 40s. And this is a segment of that 1971 endeavour, and you can see that there are masses of what are mostly very small settlements in a riverine pattern, which rather supported the idea of pastoralists rather moving around in the area. So that was the aim at the outset. Obviously, over 60 years and 4 seasons, the aims changed a little bit. To some extent, they relate to changes in archaeological science and methods, but also to changes in the area. And the Levant has been through enormous change in the 60 years. In material terms, we moved from cotton sherd bags collecting in 1966 into the plastic age. Obviously, plastic bags are much, much easier, but there are so many other things in the science, in the archaeologist's toolkit, including the development of flotation, the collection of plant and charcoal remains, and we, in the second and following seasons, had, for instance, fairly large campaigns of charcoal collection, which you see here. So the site itself, this view of the southern end of the Jordan Valley, I think describes more than I can in words what the area is like. The sides of the Rift Valley are very arid. The floor of the Jordan Valley, with the Jordan River flowing into the Dead Sea, gives you a very vivid image of this very low, very hot area with very hot, dry summers, and if they're lucky, a certain amount of rain in the winter. Where there is alluvium and a mixture with water, the soil is very fertile, but the water is limited. The great spring at Jericho, located here, and over on the eastern side of the valley, perennial streams. This one is the Wadi Hisban, and this the Wadi Kafrain. And Iktanu is located right at the edge of this very arid area on the southern side of the Wadi Hisban, whose waters are used for gravity-fed irrigation of these alluvial fans. And they, of course, are crucial to the settlement of the area, which I think probably started later in the 4th millennium, when the occupation begins at Iktanu, and I think it's there defending the access to the water coming from the plateau above in order to irrigate the soil. So the site itself is made up of 2 hills, one tall natural spur and a southern one stretching out as a long lower plateau to the south. It was, as I said, first settled in the 4th millennium, early Bronze 1, when there was a village in this area, which later spread over into this area. But after being occupied for perhaps 2 or 3 centuries, not a lot longer, the site was then abandoned for 500 or 600 years, and then suddenly re-established as a full-scale township on the southern spur. The northern hill was probably also occupied, but we've less information about that. But you can see that there is a properly laid out town here which appeared in its original layout from the outset. It was then occupied only for perhaps a couple of centuries, 200 or 300 years, before being abandoned again for the best part of a millennium. Very little occupation in there at the time, but nothing important, I think, until later in the first millennium BC, when a fortress was erected on the top of the northern hill, which you can see in this point. Sorry, I'm pointing at the screen rather than up here. A fortress up in this area, and that existed for from perhaps the 5th century, maybe the 6th, into the early 3rd century. So all of these periods of occupation are covered in the volume that we've just published. There is a section introducing the site, a section on the early Bronze I village, an agro-pastoral one, which extended to this area later, and then several sections on the main focus of the work, the intermediate Bronze Age village, which we excavated from its western end right through to the east, from this area here through into here, where there was some other indication of the occupation. The final section of the book consists of the tremendous contributions made by people, contributions to the volume, which cover the etymology of the odd name of the site, Iktanu, the animal bones, the human bones, the plants, modern and ancient, shells, and at the end, a couple of ethnographic studies, which I will come to at the end. So what I'm proposing to do is just to describe maybe 2 or 3 highlights from the excavation. I obviously cannot cover everything that's in the volume, but hope to give you some taste of it. I should say that Kathleen Kenyon has been mentioned. She was my doctoral supervisor here at Oxford. She had been excavating in Jerusalem in the summer of '65, and while there, she adopted a dog. And it became part of my student responsibilities to look after the dog until she returned in the following summer. And I'm very relieved to say that the dog survived the process, or otherwise I might not have done. So one of the highlights, again, picking up on what Bob was saying, was aerial photography. Aerial photography has been a very interesting part of Near Eastern activity. It was a significant factor during World War I, with an Australian group contingent based in the Beersheba area and German contingent supporting the Ottoman army, who were very much based in the Jordan Valley. Virtually every high point in the Jordan Valley was occupied by an Ottoman army installation. I haven't been able to use those, but what I have used extensively have been the hunting survey of 1953, which I've had access to thanks to David Kennedy and the APAM facility. It brings home, I hope, to you the fact that this is a tool that is of immense use to those wanting to work in our area. And you can see here, there is the North Tell, and here is the long, low spur with the intermediate Bronze Age town on it. and to the west, part of the fields that make up the alluvial fan. With this extensive coverage, we were able to draw up an image of the field system watered by the water from the Wadi Hispan, taken out at a higher level, gravity-fed irrigation over an extensive area, as it existed in 1953. But this was a very ancient system, probably different permutations through time, and it gives you, I think, a very clear idea of the importance of agriculture to the settlement here. You can see that the main channel runs to the north of the North Tell, but there's a subsidiary one coming down between the two parts of the site. But the hunting survey is a fairly high-level one, as also was another survey. Dr. Mendelsohn, then director of the American School in Jerusalem, very kindly included Iktanu in his infrared survey of particular sites that he was concerned with. And I know that this was shot while we were digging there in 1966, because one can just, if you work at it, pick out the site of our excavations in my Land Rover. So 1966, the Dead Sea Highway had not long been built, running down to the Abdullah Bridge over the Jordan, which was subsequently destroyed in the war in 1966. In 1990, the Royal Jordanian Air Force made an offer to assist archaeologists with some aerial photography, we would like it, and we managed to take them up and got a low-level view of the site, which has been enormously useful. So in 1990, you can see the huge number of military trenches that were cut by the army in 1967, and in fact minefields were laid both to the front and the rear of the site and still existed in 1987. They were since cleared. But it has been a matter of, we didn't have any control over the date, the time, the weather, but we were very lucky with the weather. We had an excellent pilot for the helicopter, and it was very exciting, in fact, to set out early one morning. Alison McQuitty, then director of the British Institute, came along and managed to reload the cameras with such speed and efficiency that in the minimum amount of time, which is all we could afford, we shot off 5 rolls of film over 2 sites. And you can see the beauty of some of these things. Our excavation area here and the military trenches, but what is extremely clear is the outline of the tracks on the site, all of them intermediate Bronze Age, the intermediate Bronze Age house walls, really very visible. We were able in 1966, because these walls are reasonably visible on the surface, long stretches of them, to draw up a plan of the settlement, but we could augment it with the data from the air photographs. It was a very exciting highlight of that season. So the site itself, and I'm going to focus on the intermediate Bronze Age, obviously. This is the key to the intermediate Bronze Age area that we excavated over the 4 seasons. What we selected to start with was what looked like a complete house unit, and set to work hoping that we would have sufficient depth of deposit to uncover a reasonable story. And what we found was that we had a yard with an opening to the northwest, just one little room here, and a couple of things that were little more than sheds, some pits, a hearth, an oven, and not something that we felt represented a complete house unit. The pits were extremely useful as giving us sealed deposits of phase 1 pottery. At the end of the phase, it was abandoned, and in phase 2, nearly all the walls were reused, but they added walls here and here to make a complex of 3 rooms, which looked much more like the complete domestic units that we were looking for. And so we had a phase sequence for the site. But we wanted to see if we could find a little more of the phase 1 occupations. So we went through into the next area where we had a similar story, a yard in which was a small room dating to phase 1, which went out of use and then had a large room belonging to phase 2, as it had in the previous year. So there's an image of infill, a growing population reusing the site after a period of abandonment. The phase 1 pottery, you can't have an archaeological lecture without a little bit of pottery, showed an assemblage that was very like the early Bronze Age one, a lot of continuity, but also quite a lot of change. There were cooking pots, whole-mouth ones, ordinary whole-mouth jars, cups and bowls, and jars and jugs. A fairly simple but well-made, handmade repertoire, which commonly had red slip on some of the, what you might call the tablewares, often with a band of reserved cream at the top. In phase 2, sorry, I forgot, there was a second type of cup, what I call a pedestal cup, which slightly heavier ware may not have been made on the site, whereas the rest of the repertoire was, corrugations round the rim. And this seems to be a more limited type. I begin to think it had some sort of greater significance, some sort of ritual activity, because the shape was associated with a temple in early Bronze 3, but in the Intermediate Bronze Age, in a tomb in the West Bank, is a silver goblet with an absolutely fascinating scene on it. A Janus-headed god with bulls' bodies, human figures wearing Sumerian-type sheepskin kilts, sun symbols, and really marvelous-looking snakes. There's been quite a lot of written about what the symbolism was, where it derives from. I think it's originally Mesopotamian via Syria, but in a local manifestation. And a lot of the decoration has quite a lot to do with the sorts of cylinder seals you find at the site of Tel Mardik in Syria. So in the second phase, we have much plainer pottery. There's no red slip at all. And whereas in phase 1, the emphasis seemed to be on cups and bowls, in phase 2, the emphasis is on jars. And this is the collection of smashed pottery that we found in Area A almost entirely. And it has a very fine repertoire of small bottles and jars, medium jars, large jars, and very large pithoi, and that's one of the cooking pots. Again, they're very large. And you can see how grateful I am to Manchester Museum that we had the possibility of mending all of this pottery. It's not a quick job. So, as I said, we went to the north to see if we could see more of the domestic occupation. And another highlight was the excavation of this small room here. It was slightly subterranean in that it was cut down into the natural, and the walls built on the above the tops. And the sequence, as we uncovered it, showed that there was a cylindrical silo cut in the middle, a bell-shaped silo cut in the corner, almost undermining the wall, and the cylindrical silo towards the end of phase one was partly filled in and had a mortar and a work surface set in the top. And then right at the end of phase one, the corner silo was filled in, and in the upper level was inserted the flexed burial of a child aged about 11 or 12. And the silo was then filled, the surface of the whole room filled with a very ashy deposit. At first we thought we were coming down onto a kitchen, but it's clear that it wasn't a kitchen, not the silos. And what we think happened was there was a bonfire out in the courtyard, and they took the ash and everything and sealed off the room as a closing down ceremony before they abandoned the site. And one of the reasons we think that is that intramural burial was not something that happened in the Intermediate Bronze Age. Burials tended to be extramural in outside the settlements. There were so many rather curious, it wasn't a house fire, it wasn't the sort of debris that you would get with a fire. So like the little cups, in some ways it gives us something of a feel for what the people living there were like, because this is an illiterate society as far as we know. The only things that we have are the literate records from Syria in the north and Egypt to the south. They were not easy to excavate. The fill of the silo had settled so that the burial was almost beyond arm's reach. The bell-shaped silo here, and on top of the debris was thrown the only complete vessel that we had from phase one. It was almost as if the final gesture before abandoning the site was to throw this jar. So one of the things that we were interested in also, this is the third sort of aspect of the site that I'm going to talk about very briefly, was the length of the gap between phase one and phase two at Iktanu. It was very difficult to say. We had C14 dating, and it suggested that maybe it would be no less than 10 years, but it can't have been more than a century. There's continuity, but there's also change. And we've started by looking at the nearby settlements. In 1966, this is the view from the southern spur towards the Dead Sea. You can see it just there, the hills of the West Bank to the rear, and an arid stretch of land which was occupied by a scattering of black tents and the flocks of sheep and goats and camels of the Azazma Bedu, who had fled from the war, the Israeli army, from the region of Beersheba in 1948 into Jordan, and moved around a bit and eventually settled in this area. And they, in fact, provided our workforce during the work at Iktanu. When I came back to the site in 1987, that landscape had changed tremendously. This is the same view. There's the Dead Sea in the background, but there is an extensive township that was established here after we had been here somewhere after 1967. we looked at the settlement. It had houses built of much the same materials as we were excavating at Iktanu, a different plan, different sort of function, and the older houses were already being abandoned in favour of modern structures with yards and gardens. This one was abandoned, this one was being used as a stable. And it began to feel that it would be of interest to see how quickly these settlements appeared, how quickly they decayed with reference to what we were excavating. So we went slightly further north, 3 kilometers north of Nada, to the site of Rada. And that was somewhere that I had visited in 1965. It was a refugee village of Palestinians from the 1948 war, and they had started settling this area in apparently 1957. And you can see that the original layout, was of mud brick houses stretched out along the Wadi Hisban, which was the sole source of water for the inhabitants. By 1990, the original settlement was had grown to the size of a municipality, a population of about 5,000 or 6,000, which had grown from 1,000 in the course of 20 to 30 years, and was being overlaid by the infrastructure for a modern settlement with schools, hospitals, and other facilities. The air view shows you these roads being laid. Some of the old houses had to be demolished to make way for it. And what we looked at over 5 years, intermittently, was the state of decay of these buildings. As you can see, the sun-dried mud brick begins to decay if it's not maintained at least annually with the winter rains. Once the walls start, the roof goes, the roof disappears, and we found within 3 to 4 years these buildings were reduced to little more than dust, so that the gap between phase 1 and 2, with the destruction, the decay of the walls and replacement, could have been a very short interval, much shorter than I would have anticipated. It's partly a product of the environment, winter rain when it happens, very hot summers, very dry, but also the problems of wind. We found every season at Iktanu, the east wind hit the site at least once, often several times in the course of our work. And it is, I think it's worse around Iktanu than it is even nearby. The Shagia will hit Amman, you can feel it up there, but it's nothing like what happens in Iktanu. I think it may be something to do with the topography of Mount Nebo above. If this sort of wind occurred in the 3rd millennium, as it does today, it might well have been a factor in the abandonment, the regular abandonment of the site. The tool tent here, and what we had to lower it to weigh it down with rocks. It's almost impossible to walk up in it, and even the sections on the site were scoured out of every bit of earth, and the pebbles just fell out. I don't think rain and wind are necessarily just factors in the abandonments of the site. I think it's much more complex. If they're transhumant, as the inhabitants of modern Nada are, they might well go up to the plateau every summer when the local grazing dries up. because Iktanu's inhabitants relied on their crops, but particularly on their flocks of sheep and goats. So a drought, several dry winters might lead to the empty silos that we found, to the empty jars that we found. But it also is possible that they went one year, found a better place, and stayed away. It's the mobility of pastoralists that is relevant, I think, during this period. But as we see today in the modern world, there are the pressures of politics and warfare. There are destructions of sites in Syria in the later third millennium. There's pressure from Egypt. So I think it's a much more complex period than had originally been thought back in the middle of the 20th century. I think that there's much more still to know. There's much more still to come from Iktanu as well. And I hope that one day maybe somebody will go and look. But I think what has struck me over the years is just how much change there is in the archaeological tools, in the world around us, and indeed in ourselves as our thinking changes. And to me, one of the really magical things about this book is that it is a digital publication. It's there online, and the magic, the absolute magic, is it's there at the click of a QR code, like a loaf of bread or something it could be. And for that, I really want to thank Helen Boyd, Caroline Middleton, and the CBRL. Thank you for listening.